Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Derrick Broze of the Conscious Resistance Network, and today we are going to be talking about the latest in the historic fluoride trial, the fluoride lawsuit. Today is August 6, 2020, and we are going to cover that information. The latest hearing has just wrapped up in the last 20, 30 minutes or so. We're going to cover that, and I also will give you a brief review of what's already happened and what's coming. But before we get into all that, I want to remind you guys to bookmark my website. You guys know the drill, theconsciousresistance.com. This is the home for all of my content where I've been producing since 2011. And we have a team of people here who put out different podcasts. We put out different video reports, interviews from folks all around the world. We've got articles. We've got t-shirts if you want to support. You can also find conscious music on our music tab where you can submit music to us. And more important than ever, it is so important that you follow us on Float or on Minds, on Hive. You join my text list. I highly encourage you to join the text list. Sign up for the email newsletter. And follow me on Telegram if you want to get everything that I read throughout the day. And follow us on BitChute and Library, which is honestly my personal favorite if you want to get our content. Because I know some of you are watching on Facebook and YouTube right now, and you can't rely on them. There's, I think, an inevitable upcoming deletion from my channel and others like it very soon, especially with some of the powerful guests that I have coming up, and especially because I'm one of the only people covering the historic fluoride trial, which according to the mainstream is just a conspiracy theory and has no basis in fact. But we know that that's BS. If you go over to The Last American Vagabond, you can find my articles that I've written about the fluoride case starting back in June. Historical court case, the fluoride cover-up will soon be exposed. And the trial started in San Francisco Monday, June 8th, and it went on for 2 weeks. And I did these two articles. In addition, I did a week one review, including how one of the experts said that he was, that he was threatened because of his fluoride study that he had done. Also, some of the experts, including government experts, admit that fluoride is a pesticide. I mean, there were so many different key points in there, including the discussion of corruption of fluoride science and how some scientists are kind of like rent-a-lab coats is how they describe, rent-a-white coats, is how they were described as. So I will post those links in the video description and in the comments for those who want to get caught up. And then finally, where things ended up in the second week, the ruling was delayed as the judge asked the defense and the plaintiffs to discuss new evidence. So it was sort of it was a disappointment, I'll say. But it wasn't a complete letdown because the judge didn't say, you have no evidence, you have no standing, I'm dismissing this case, fluoride is totally safe, end of story. Instead, Judge Edward Chin out of San Francisco said that he would delay the ruling until the defense, which is the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. government, and the plaintiffs, which is the Fluoride Action Network, Food and Water Watch, and other organizations, had a chance to confer, to come together to see if they could come to an agreement. So just a little bit of background for those who are not aware of this whole trial. The EPA has something called the Toxic Substances Control Act. I think it was from 1972. And under the Toxic Substances Control Act, U.S. citizens and organizations have the right to petition the EPA to review chemicals if they are found to be dangerous or hazardous to humans. So the Fluoride Action Network and others did this. They filed a petition back in 2016, and the petition was denied by the EPA for various reasons. They then decided to file a suit against the EPA for denying it, and there was a 4-year court battle back and forth, basically not actually in court, but just filing motions, appeals, just this kind of the way, lawyers and the courts actually work, not like always like the courtroom dramas you see on TV. Imagine that. But they did that for 4 years. And then finally, we got to this point where it was time for it to actually come to court. And that's what happened in June. And the attorneys representing the plaintiffs, the Fluoride Action Network, Food and Water Watch, Moms Against Fluoridation, and several other groups and individuals basically had the opportunity to present their evidence that fluoride causes harm, specifically causes neurotoxicity in children. We've seen this studies coming out about IQ levels and things of that sort. So they presented all that data and all that information in a courtroom, which I think was pretty epic to say for myself, because as somebody who's investigated and looked into this for years, it was quite affirming to see that it brought up in a courtroom and actually discussed with the nuance and the seriousness that it deserves, not just being dismissed as some kind of conspiracy. That's sort of what typically happens. So yeah, that's what happened. That's what got us to the point where we had these scientists coming out and speaking out. We learned a lot. I really, really want to recommend you guys reading my summaries of the first 2 weeks of the trial, because there's just too much to really recap. I've already done that in other videos. So at the end of that 2 weeks, though, the judge says, all right, I'm going to delay this. You guys try to see if y'all can come to an agreement, because as I mentioned, the plaintiffs filed a petition under the Toxic Substances Control Act. It was denied by the EPA. And the judge said, hey, considering all the new evidence that has come forward in the 4 years since this case began, maybe you guys can come to an agreement. And we all knew this wasn't going to happen. We knew that the EPA wasn't going to back off and say, yeah, you're right, fluoride's harmful. And I knew for a fact that the plaintiffs, Fluoride Action Network, weren't going to just drop their petition or their lawsuit and say, you know, we were wrong. And so, as expected, there was no agreement that was reached. And that was kind of where things started today. So I did some live tweeting. We're just going to go through some of these tweets. The hearing began about an hour ago. Judge Chen, he was recapping the previous hearings, which is what I just did for you guys. And he said that he was disappointed to hear that there is not going to be an agreement. Then we had EPA attorney Deborah Carfora answering Judge Chen, stating that the petitions under the Toxic Substance Control Act must consider all available raw data. So this kind of became a point early on where the EPA is saying that they need to see all the raw data for the studies that the plaintiffs, the Fluoride Action Network attorneys, had submitted to court. And this is something that hadn't previously been brought up. And so there was some discussion on why all of a sudden they need the raw data and not just data in general. They wanted to see every single thing from the study, the raw data. And the EPA Carfora says they are willing to reconsider the petition and consider new available data, and would come to an agreement with Fluoride Action Network to do this within the required 90 days. And this is, again, where the controversy is, because Fluoride Action Network says we've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of hours and time fighting this case for the last 4 years. We've already submitted a petition, and the judge essentially said he thinks there's standing issues with the petition, that there's problems within the petition, that they need to refile it. And then once it's refiled, the EPA has to immediately review it, and they have 90 days to go over it. And then after that, the judge said they can meet again and see if anything has changed. So that's kind of, I mean, that's the conclusion. I'll spoiler alert. That's what happened. There was no ruling today. It got delayed till November 5th or 6th. But this is how it happened, is the EPA is still arguing that they don't have enough information, that they would reconsider the petition, but that they need the raw data based on the specific evidence for fluoride, and says that there are inconsistencies and variances in the studies used by the Fluoride Action Network. Judge Chen says he thinks the EPA would have easier access to the available data than the plaintiffs, and that it shouldn't be up to the plaintiffs. Fluoride Action Network attorney Michael Connett says that the EPA is conflating topics of debate, and he said that Fluoride Action Network witness Dr. Grandjean, never said that he would release all the available data, because, again, there's just discussion about we need access to the raw data, we need it, ASAP. The EPA is now requesting all raw data available on studies. And Michael Connett said that the MIRAC study, which is a Canadian study, which is one of the most, if you look that up, MIRAC, M-I-R-A-C, Canadian fluoride study, you'll see that it is one of the hardest pieces of evidence that they presented, and is definitely generally well regarded despite the EPA trying to dismiss it. So the study has a specific stipulation that all data must be examined in Canada, not in the US. And so Michael Connett's like, we can't even get this available data, the raw data, because this is an American court. And you have to go to Canada just to get access to the data. And he said that this would be difficult. Connett says that after the June 15th hearing, this was an interesting part, that the EPA promised to make their staff available to the plaintiffs to help collaborate with them. Shortly after, though, EPA Carfora emailed and said, never mind, we don't see a point in making staff available. Connett said, quote, "We tried, Your Honor. We're not keen on starting a new petition." He did say, "We did try to work with the EPA, but EPA insisted, quote, we needed to do a new systematic review and added this new condition for raw data." Judge Chen asked for clarification about what they mean by a meaningful review. And as typical with this case and most court cases I've covered, there's all these legalese arguments over what does meaningful mean? What does systematic mean? What does, harm mean? And how do we judge that? It can be a bit cumbersome, but that's how the law works. If EPA Carfora said that if the plaintiffs filed a new petition, it would be substantially reviewed, and that EPA will, quote, give careful consideration to a new petition. So what it seems like is that Michael Connett and the plaintiffs are concerned that, look, we've been through this for 4 years. If we file a new petition, how do we know that the EPA is not going to take another 2 years to look at that they could, like they just claimed, they said that they were backed up. The reason they didn't collaborate with the Fluoride Action Network is she said, well, we realized that we're understaffed and we just don't have the time to help them. So even though they told the court that they would provide EPA staff and make them available to help the plaintiffs, and then they even said that in an email, shortly after that, they changed their mind. So it's not unreasonable to be skeptical of the EPA actually doing their job based on how corrupt we know the EPA is. So should they trust that the EPA is going to be in a hurry to get this petition done? And should they trust or think that the EPA will review the petition any differently than they did 4 years ago? And that was another point, is the judge kept saying, well, I would hope the EPA would actually review the petition, the new petition, based on its merits and not just dismiss it offhand. We'll see. EPA Carrefour says it's the plaintiff's burden to prove the risk. Also, the EPA no longer has resources to work with them. EPA Carrefour's position is that the plaintiffs have still not established harm caused by fluoride. And I added, what trial has she been at? Because the judge himself even said it's clear that fluoride causes harm to the human body, especially neurotoxic harm. Again, legalese argument is whether or not the evidence that shows harm meets the EPA's definition for harm. And this is what's so crazy about government, is we can have a study that clearly says this causes harm, but the government uses, well, how do we define harm? Oh, we define harm as less than this amount of people die, or however they measure that. And that measurement, that definition they have of harm might not meet the standard definition that scientists use or that most of us would use, but it doesn't matter. If it doesn't meet their criteria, then even if we know it causes harm in the real world, it doesn't cause harm under the EPA's definitions. And so that's, I think it's going to be a big point of contention as we move forward. Fluoride Action Network comment discussing with Judge Chen the soon-to-be-released draft report from the National Academy of Sciences and the National Toxicology Program. Excuse me, I think I meant National Toxicology Program there. Because what's going on is the National Toxicology Program, which is a federal government agency, which some of you will remember did a big review on EMFs and found that 2G and 3G do cause tumors in rats and things of that sort. They did a 10-year, $35 million study on EMFs and for cell phones and things of that sort. Well, now they're doing this really big review on fluoride, and they have been working on this for at least 4 years. And so the judge is saying, look, we have this new draft report coming from the National Toxicology Program in October, which is true. And he's saying, so, why don't we just wait for that to come out and we can get more evidence? But, Fluoride Action Network attorney Michael Connett said, science is never complete. I wish we had a date for the final study that would resolve everything, but that's not the burden under the EPA TSCA agreement. Judge Chen said that he agrees that science is never complete and that TSCA does not require it, but he believes that the upcoming National Toxicology Program would substantially contribute to the pool of knowledge. So he's saying, they should wait. And again, here's this review. It's scheduled to come out October 19th, 2020. There will be a review, and it's just a review of the draft version. So Connett was arguing, like, look, Your Honor, this is just a draft version. It's not even going to be the final version. You want us to wait, till October, and we don't even know what this thing is going to say. We don't even know if it'll be relevant. And that's pretty much what the judge said. He started to get a little bit aggravated, and he was interrupting the government attorney, Deborah Carrefour, and saying, like, look, pretty much he made it clear, like, this is my decision. Judge Chen said there are, quote, grave questions about the standing, again, about the petition that the Fluoride Action Network filed. He says one of the benefits of the new petition is the questions of standing and merit could be addressed, and that with the upcoming new evidence, the EPA will give it a new look. And Judge Chen said it would be irresponsible for the EPA not to look at a new petition and assume they know the evidence. This research is still developing. Judge Chen said, my inclination is to hold this trial in abeyance, which is just a delay or sort of just putting it on hold. And he said, quote, one can't deny the substantial questions that are raised by the Element and MIRAC studies, which so far are the most reliable studies we have at this point. And those studies were heavily discussed in my previous articles and this trial. They clearly show that there is harm caused by water fluoridation. Judge Chen, I would ask the plaintiff if they are going to resubmit the petition, they need to consider the complaints about standing. There's lots of discussion on standing. Connett says, we are entering a new phase of this case, and we probably have hundreds, if not thousands, of people within the plaintiff organizations that fit the criteria the court is trying to study regarding the effects of fluoride. It seemed like he was trying to offer up saying, like, look, we can study some of the moms and people in our organization and use them as evidence. He was looking for ways to find a resolution that wouldn't involve delaying it, I believe. Connett says, while the EPA and the NTP are separate, we learned in the trial that the EPA has substantial input into the NTP's rulings, which was really interesting. So he says, if the court wants to wait for the NTP studies to come out, could plaintiffs get discovery of communications between the EPA and NTP on the conclusions on fluoride? So he's basically saying, like, look, we know that the NTP and the EPA, that at least the EPA has some influence on the NTP. It's not totally independent as some would like to believe. So he's saying, if we're going to wait for that, can we get discovery of any communications that the EPA has with the NTP between now and then, which could reveal, if they attempt to influence the decision. And then the government attorney comes back, and Deborah Carfora starts talking about how Michael Connett is a member of Food and Water Watch and trying to insinuate that him and his family are biased. Judge Chin interrupts and said he's not allowing for new evidence, only consideration of the NTP info. And Judge Chin explained the criteria for moving forward. He says that he hopes the EPA will not ignore the new evidence on fluoride without actually examining it. Michael Connett says, with respect to filing a new petition, the idea that FAN would submit a new petition, EPA would have 90 days to review. If denied again, the case would come back to court. He's trying to ask, like, are we going to be able to come directly back to you? We're not going to have to wait 4 more years and go through court again. Can we file this petition? They review it within 90 days. We look at what the NTP says in October, and then come back to you, Judge. And that's basically what they did decide. So Judge Chen says he would hear the case again. He wouldn't retry the whole thing, but he would hear it again if the EPA denies the petition once more. Deborah Carfora said, my client would like the court to rule on the evidence presented, not wait for the new NTP info, and not leave the decision in abeyance. Unfortunately, Judge said, I am not just going to take the NTP and go into a closet and read it. I want to know more about it. May allow each side to present one expert after released to go over evidence. Judge Chen, he explained the whole process, and then he tells Michael Connett that he believes there are serious questions regarding the standing, and I will not be convinced otherwise. They must submit a new petition. Fan Connett asked Judge if he is talking about those are some details. Let me just skip ahead. Judge Chen says, in the meantime, Fluoride Action Network files a new petition with the EPA, takes care of issues, and then review the case after the NTP October draft release and talk about case scheduling. Judge Chen says, quote, so that's what I'm going to do, hold the case in abeyance. He says he will keep the record open, will allow reviewing of evidence, but not submission of new evidence. I understand there's a gap here in the approach for this potential petition. I'm going to encourage the plaintiffs to address the standing issues and to provide as much raw data as possible for the EPA. With that, I'm going to allow the plaintiff to go back, file a new petition, address the issues mentioned, and keep the door open to new evidence that may appear during the interim. The next status conference, November 5th, 2020. So that's where we're at, is, no decision. And I will say, this is just, I'll throw in my own personal thoughts and speculation, that the judge did seem to strike a different tone this time since we last heard from him in June. I don't know if he was influenced by somebody or whatever, but he seemed to be a lot more favorable towards the Fluoride Action Network prior. And we don't want him to be biased, right? If we're assuming that the United States court system works and is not an injustice system, if we assume that, there's some legitimate judges there, and that's a big assumption. But I will say, to the judge's credit, that he didn't immediately dismiss this case. He hasn't come in and said these people are a bunch of wackos, conspiracy theorists, and just thrown it out of court, which is what those of us who talk to the average person in the streets usually deal with. He actually listened to the evidence, and as my articles on the Last American Vagabond show, the judge clearly said that there is a wealth of evidence showing the harm with fluoride, and that it was presented in court. But again, we have to argue, does that meet the EPA's definition of harm, which is just silly. But that's where it's at, guys. So I will try to get an update as far as an interview with Michael Connett or Paul Connett of the Fluoride Action Network. And we got Jay here. Jay, thank you, Jay. Jay, who you guys can see his comment, accurate summary of today's status conference. Jay is with the Fluoride Action Network as well and has been helpful keeping me apprised of what's going on. So thank you, Jay, for your work and for everybody out there who are doing that. And if Dr. Paul Connett or Michael Connett, even, I'd love to talk to Michael, have time to do an interview over the next few months, I would love to set that up just to, get people their rundown of what's going on. And we will, of course, keep reporting on any other updates between now and November. But that's basically where it's going to be at. And like I said, I will include here, I'll go ahead and post these links to my articles in the comments, but I will include these links in the video description once I hang up with you guys and get those out to you. And look, if you care about this topic, please do visit fluoridealert.org. I want to mention that if you go to fluoridealert.org, they recently not only do they have the most up-to-date, accurate information on this trial, but they also recently put out 2 awesome videos discussing testimony from some of their witnesses, 2 of the witnesses, I believe. And you can find that at fluoridealert.org, which is just the website for the Fluoride Action Network. And you can find all the details about the trial if you want to support them and their efforts, because it seems like the court's going to make them fight this for potentially years. Then you can do so at your own discretion. But that's where we're going to leave it now, guys. Thank you so much for following, for tuning in. Please bookmark the website, theconsciousresistance.com. Stay tuned to thelastamericanvagabond.com, where you'll see some of my new articles. I have an article coming out later today about contact tracing, and then I'm going to do a written version of the fluoride trial about what happened today. That'll come out tomorrow, and you guys can share that with your friends and family to educate them that there is a federal trial going on about the dangers of fluoride, and that it is not a crazy conspiracy theory. Plenty of sane, rational, intelligent people understand the dangers, and hopefully then they can start to ask the questions of, well, if that's true, why are they putting it in my water? Why have I been told this is a crazy conspiracy theory? Why have I been lied to all my life? And hopefully things will, keep going from there. But until next time, guys, we're going to leave it there. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Peace, my friends.